Hey minions, welcome to Crank It Up, the smash up show where if Eric had his way, we'd be paid by the pun. I'm Jim Price.
I'm Sarah Traeger.
And I'm Eric. And Jim, you cannot nerf my power.
Let's just do the show already.
On today's episode, we're going to be talking about a faction from the That 70s expansion, which comes out today. We're going to be doing a card preview for the Kung Fu Fighters. Check it out.
Let's crank it up.
So today marks the long-awaited release of That 70s expansion. This is the 13th release for Smash Up, and it's one that provides 4 new factions: the Disco Dancers, the Kung Fu Fighters, the Vigilantes, and the Truckers. I'm really excited about this, and I think it's going to bring a lot of good things to the game. What are you two looking forward to most?
Well, actually, I'm really excited about the Trucker faction here. Truckers are not normally something that I would get excited about at all in real life, but in the game, the Trucker faction just looks really fun to me. There's a lot of just kind of ridiculous artwork, and there's some really cool synergies with trucking as like an industry and the actual card. So they really brought reality into the game, but in a fun way that I think is going to be really cool to explore as part of it, the game of Smash Up. The artwork is really fun, and I think it's just going to be a cool faction to pair up. So I think that some of what the Trucker faction does has been seen before in the game, but I think that in this particular faction, they're going to reiterate some of that in really fun and unique ways that should be pretty cool to see.
So one of the aspects that I'm looking forward to the most is the Vigilantes. So instead of having one Power 5 or plus minion that's kind of the king of the bunch, there's a handful of these Power 4 minions that kind of have reactionary effects to what other players do. They're really fun. They're going to go really well, I believe, with like shapeshifters and superheroes, because who doesn't like superhero vigilantes? Arrow. And one of the things that I look forward to is them springing into action since it's March 21st.
I have no response for that, but I'm most excited for El Bandito of the Truckers. I think this is the very type of faction-driving card that we like to see in Smash Up. I think it completely changed my opinion of the Truckers, and I'm just really excited for a card that I naively believe is named after me.
There he goes, trying to steal the show.
So next we have a preview of the Kung Fu Fighters faction, but first, a quick word from our sponsor.
Tired of your noisy rock star neighbors playing their music too loudly? Hire one of our certified handymans to eliminate them today. Here at HAVOC Exterminators, we have the experience and commitment necessary to take care of your problems. With 24/7 customer support and the Bear Cavalry on loan from the KGB, we're here to handle your problem, regardless of faction. Are you tired of all those pesky minions infesting your houses? We can handle mythic horses. Teddy bears? We'll stuff them out. Geeks? No problem. Cthulhu cultists? They practically destroy themselves. Robots? Affirmative.
Not responsible for robot destruction.
Dinosaurs? How do you think they became extinct? Superheroes? We specialize in this. Jim, you can wash all those yourself. Ninjas. Maybe. HAVOC, helping assassinate very obnoxious creatures.
Cricket. You may transfer a +1 power counter from one minion to another. Drunken Master. Talent. If this minion has no +1 power counters on it, place a +1 power counter on it. Lady Whirlwind. Talent. If this minion has no +1 power counters on it, destroy a minion here with less power to place a +1 power counter on this minion. Dragon Warrior. Ongoing. This minion cannot be destroyed. Talent. Transfer any number of +1 power counters from one minion to another. Ancient Chinese art. Play on a base. Talent. Place a +1 power counter on a minion here, or transfer any number of +1 power counters from one minion to another minion here. A little bit frightening. Choose one of your minions, destroy a minion at its base with less power to place 2 +1 power counters total on your minions there. Expert timing. Choose one of your cards, transfer any number of +1 power counters from it to another card, and or use a talent on it an extra time. Special, you may play this before a base scores. Oh ho ho. Play on a base, ongoing. After another player plays a minion here, place a +1 power counter on one of your minions. Everybody was kung fu fighting. Choose a base. Each player with a minion there destroys another player's minion there. Let's get it on. Choose one of your minions. Destroy one or more minions at the same base with total power less than or equal to that minion. Fast as lightning. Choose a minion. Until the end of turn, it gains +2 power, and if it would go to the discard pile, it is returned to its owner's hand instead. Everybody knew their part. Choose one of your minions. Play an extra minion with less power on the same base. Ancient Dojo. After you play a minion here, place a +1 counter on each of your minions here with less power than that minion. Tournament site. When this base scores, the winner gains 1 BP for each player with no power here.
So as you can see, the Kung Fu Fighters are all about power counters and transferring them around from minion to minion. What's really interesting is that you can transfer power counters from minions that aren't even your own, and I think we'll see that in a lot of the synergies. We'll be talking about what factions work really well with them, any factions that don't work well, and what factions can be a counter to the Kung Fu Fighters, or the other way around. My first faction for the Kung Fu Fighters is going to be the Werewolves. Now the Werewolves may be another power-based faction with a little bit of destruction, also like the Kung Fu Fighters, but they excel in a certain amount of things that will do really well with the Kung Fu Fighters. Mostly, the Werewolves have actions that benefit from being the minion with the highest power on a particular base. Cards such as Marking Territory and Leader of the Pack will want to be put on a minion with the most power. The Kung Fu Fighters have many ways of enhancing the power of a minion, but what's really great is the fact that the Dragon Warrior can move power counters from one minion to another. This can set up a number of interesting combos. Marking Territory is one of my favorite cards because it's really a guaranteed way to score a base. If you're winning at the start of your turn, you should win that base, and only specials are going to change that. One of the great things that Marking Territory can do is you can use the Dragon Warrior to send all the power counters to one minion on a base on the first turn. Then that will cause Marking Territory to fire. Then you can move enough power counters off of that minion. You'll still be scoring the base because the breakpoint will have already been set to 0, but you can save those power counters for another minion. That and being able to play the extra action or draw an additional card, I see a lot of synergy there. The Werewolves also have an interesting action like Let the Dog Out, which lets you destroy any number of minions with total power less than one of your minions. So you can beef up one minion and use it to be able to destroy several of that minion's base. I'm also really excited to see how the strategy is going to change when the Secret Werewolf Titan gets revealed, because I think that's a definite match for the Kung Fu Fighters.
So when the werewolves are like eating each other, does that make it like a dog-eat-dog world?
What does it have to do with Kung Fu Fighters?
You're talking about how you're using one minion to destroy another minion, right?
Sarah, what's your next combo?
All right, so when I was looking at what combos I thought would be good to go with the Kung Fu Fighters, or what factions I thought would be good to go with the Kung Fu Fighters, I immediately thought that the Mad Scientists were like the answer to this question. There are so many good synergies between the Mad Scientists and the Kung Fu Fighters that I think would be really fun to pull off. And it won't be one of those decks where you're kind of just like hoping for that you draw that one card that you need to pull off your combos. It's one that there are a lot of options for combo making throughout all of the card options you have between the two factions. One of the ones that I thought would be really cool is a card called Blitzed from the Mad Scientist faction. It says that you can, it's an action, and it says that you can remove any number of +1 counters from your minions and destroy a minion with power less than or equal to the number of counters that you removed. because there are so many counters between the mad scientists and the kung fu fighters, and because there's a lot of movement of those counters, then I think that you can really manage the counters well, and then use cards like Blitz to turn around and defeat minions with all of that power that you've managed to kind of consolidate. So things like that with the Mad Scientist faction I think are going to be really cool. There's also a couple of other actions in the Mad Scientist faction that I think would be neat that go along well with the Kung Fu Fighters. Cards like the German Engineering, they let you play +1 counters after you play on a base. Cards like It's Alive let you play additional minions and add power counters to them. So those kind of things mixed in with like the Dragon Warrior from the Kung Fu Fighters, where his talent is that you can transfer any number of +1 counters from him to another minion. Things like that, where you're kind of moving all these power counters around and then you're using them to actually destroy other minions or quickly ramp up on bases. Like I said, I just felt like when I was looking over the Kung Fu Fighters that the Mad Scientists were like the perfect combo for them.
I also like how they have the card Body Shop, which lets you destroy one minion and convert their power into +1 power counters that you can put on any minion. The fact that the Dragon Warrior is a power 5 and is indestructible, that's a surge of +5 power or more, because the Dragon Warrior can have additional power counters on him, and that's a great way of just doing a blitz of power from one minion to another.
I agree.
Cool.
Eric, what's your first?
So my first one is the Mythic Greeks. And of course they have that synergetic power of power counters. But one of the things that I really saw that was an added benefit is to use a favor of Hades to place an action card from your discard pile into your hands. You could use that to bring Fast as Lightning back into your hand so you can continue to keep bringing the Dragon Warrior back to life, which I thought was quite ironic considering it was Fast as Lightning. I was hoping to use it with a favor of Zeus, but it doesn't quite work as well with favor of Zeus as it does with the favor of Hades.
Okay. Anything else with the Mythic Greeks?
No, they just have that power counter synergetic.
Yeah, Odysseus is going to be generating a lot of power counters, and then you can just move them from one base to another. So my second one is going to be one that you almost hear no one talk about, and that's the vampires. Yep, you heard me right, the vampires. I think there's actually something here, and it would be nice to try the vampires with the Kung Fu Fighters. Why do I think that would be? The Kung Fu Fighters obviously have their namesake, everybody was Kung Fu fighting, where everybody on the base will be destroying one minion of someone else. And I think that will work really well with the Count because he'll get the +1 power counter for everyone but his own minion. They also have a card like A Little Bit Frightening, which is going to destroy a minion and create power counters as well. I also think that the vampires will benefit from the fact that you can play minions with less power. The vampire minions and actions are all about placing +1 power counters, and I think that the Kung Fu Fighters will allow you to have more utility with those power counters. You can leave the Count out as an engine card on one base. He'll be racking up power counters every time a minion is destroyed, and the Dragon Warrior can move them to enough, so you never have to stop getting rid of your Count. You can leave him as an engine card, and I think that there's a lot that can be done with those counters. I'm not saying that this is going to work as well as maybe some other combos would be, but it's nice to see the vampires finally getting a pairing that they could use.
Yeah, because typically they suck, don't they?
Yes, they do.
All right, my second one was kind of a bland choice to me, but I think that the pirate faction is usually a pretty good faction to kind of fill in the cracks of things. And I think that with the movement of the pirates and the +1 counters from the Kung Fu Fighters, you can end up racking up a lot of +1 counters and then quickly moving them around with the pirate faction. So one of the combinations that I think might be really cool between the Kung Fu Fighters and the Pirates is a card. It's an action card from the Pirate faction called Powder Keg. It allows you to destroy one of your minions and all minions with an equal or less power on the same base. If you combine that with the Dragon Warrior, which is the king minion from the Kung Fu Fighters, he's a power 5, and he has the ongoing ability that he cannot be destroyed, as well as a talent that you can transfer any number of +1 counters from one minion to another. So if you combine those two and you really ramp up your Dragon Warrior and then Powder Keg that base, then you can destroy all of the minions on that base that have power less than your Dragon Warrior, and typically that's going to be pretty much everybody, especially if you have those power counters on there, since he's already a power 5. And then in addition to destroying everybody else's, you won't actually destroy your Dragon Warrior since he cannot be destroyed. So I think that combination could be pretty rough for some other players. You know, you're destroying 3 or 4 of their minions and you didn't lose anything. That could be pretty rough, and I think that's a nice synergistic combo between the Kung Fu Fighters and the Pirates. So again, I think the Pirate faction is a little on the bland side, but I think it has some nice cards that fill in for the Kung Fu Fighters underneath their really powerful cards. The Pirates have some cards that just kind of create some play that kind of evens out across the board.
I actually really like that combo because the first mate with +1 power counters is always a good thing because they don't ever have to go, and the more +1 power counters they have, the harder they'll be to destroy.
Yeah, for sure.
The other really interesting thing I thought about when you said your combo was that you can use the Dragon Warrior to make someone else be more powerful than him. So you could make your own minion survive and still do powder keg on the Dragon Warrior. So you transfer 3 to, let's say, Lady Whirlwind, and she's a 7. She'll survive the destruction because she has more power, and Dragon Warrior will still survive because he's indestructible.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I didn't even think about that, but that would work.
All right, Eric, what's your next one?
So my next one is the Giant Ants. Again, another power counter strong faction. And I was thinking of a very interesting combination you could do with these. So say you start off on a ninja style base and you're leading with first. You could use expert timing to drop all your power. If you have it all centralized on, say, the Dragon Warrior, you can move all of that power to another minion on another base, so that you're now second or maybe even third, whatever it ends up being, on the base that's breaking, and you start scoring another base. And then you could use Under Pressure from the Giant Ants and move it again to another minion, in turn breaking 3 bases in one turn, catching people completely by surprise. It would really require some expert timing.
Yeah, my favorite thing about the Giant Ants is that you're doing something wrong if you don't break at least 2 bases on the same turn. Same thing with the Pirates, but...
yeah.
So we covered all the 4 monster factions, so I guess what you're saying is if you don't have the monster faction and the monster expansion and you want to buy that 70s expansion, definitely consider purchasing it because we've covered all 4 factions from that set.
One of the cool things that I like about Smash Up, and this is sidebarring a little bit, so bear with me, but one of the cool things I like about Smash Up is that you don't actually have to buy any one thing in order to play this game. If you really wanted to, you could go out and buy any expansion for it, and without having anything else, just having that single expansion, you'd have enough for 2 people to play the game. And that's really nice financially, because if you have never bought anything for this game and you wanted to jump in, you don't have to go out and buy every single thing that's ever come out in order to have a complete play experience. You could just go out and buy 1 or 2 of those smaller sets if you wanted to, and you'd have pretty much everything that you need to play a complete game. So it's kind of fun if you don't have everything for the game, or if you have, just a few things here and there, to sort of pick out things that go well together, or things that you're attracted to based on the artwork, or the stories that they tell, that kind of thing. And I think that you're definitely right. Those 2 would be good to get together.
That's a very interesting concept about, you can buy just the expansions, and it'd be very interesting because if you think about it, if you buy the Big in Japan expansion, that's going to be a completely different experience than any other expansion or base set that you can imagine, because you got the Titans in there that add an entirely new element to it that just can throw off your experience of the rest of the game and just be a completely new game that when you eventually do go to the other one, you're like, where's my Titans? I need my Titans.
Titans event kit coming June 2018.
The one caveat I do have to mention here is that if you do buy just the expansions, you'll run a little low on bases. That tends to be the only real problem that develops if you just buy the expansions. You don't have a lot of them, or you don't have the base game. You'll run out of those bases fairly quickly, but otherwise it works pretty well.
Sounds like a great topic for a Breakpoint segment.
Spoiler.
So, anyone else have any synergies they want to talk about?
Not Synergies, no.
I have one more.
Okay.
It's the Minions of Cthulhu. I feel like the obligatory Cthulhu expansion is underrepresented in our podcast and also just generally in the Smash Up game itself. Not a lot of people have played with the obligatory Cthulhu, or some people avoid it, and I can understand why for a lot of different reasons. One, I know that Cthulhu as a theme doesn't always strike with people, and I totally understand that. Two is that there are some fiddly bits in the obligatory Cthulhu expansion that are not included in any of the other expansions, the madness cards, that kind of thing. But it's probably one of my favorite of the expansions because of those fiddly bits. The madness cards in particular create some really cool things that can happen within your decks, especially if you pair them, with other interesting factions. And so when I was looking for synergies for the Kung Fu Fighters, I picked the Minions of Cthulhu. And one of the reasons I did that is because it's a little bit more complex. It's not your pirates. It's a little harder to play than one of the easier decks. But there are some neat things that you can do if you know how to play the madness cards correctly, or to your advantage. And so I thought that with the +1 counters, and some of the abilities of movement between those +1 counters, that the Kung Fu fighters provide, and some of the abilities that arise out of the Minions of Cthulhu faction, I thought that there could be some fun synergies. So there's a couple of cards in the Minions of Cthulhu deck that straight out destroy other minions, regardless of like power or things like that. Now, obviously, it's going to still abide by the rules of, if you cannot destroy a minion, you can't destroy that with the corruption cards, but it can just straight up destroy some minions. So if you're having trouble, the Kung Fu Fighters are a fairly powerful faction on their own for destruction, but if you're having trouble getting rid of someone's super powerful minion or tricky minion that keeps slipping through, the corruption card will just completely take care of that. And then it also has a shuffle back into your deck any number of actions you've already used card. There's only one of those, but I always find that to be helpful. You can, you play a few good actions, you want them back in your hand. It's nice to have that kind of a card. And then, like I said, it has a lot of those cards that introduce the madness cards, which can be a little bit fiddly. Now, for every 2 madness cards that you have in your deck at the end of the game, you're going to lose a point, and that's in your discard pile and your deck. But the advantage to that is you can do some really cool stuff with the madness cards. They'll let you play additional cards. They'll let you have extra actions. They'll let you move things around. So if you can leverage that to your advantage, while simultaneously finding ways to get those cards out of your hand or your deck as you play, then you can take advantage of those really powerful abilities and then get rid of those cards before they end up costing you.
For the record, I actually really like the Innsmouth and I play them a lot.
They're a good faction. I like most of the factions in the obligatory Cthulhu deck, and like I said, it's a little bit complex. This is more complex than your pirates or something like that. But if you haven't played with it and you get the chance, I would try it. It's a lot of fun.
Great. So what about anti-synergies? A faction that you wouldn't pair with the Kung Fu Fighters?
Oddly enough, the factions that I talk about, I would not want to play the Kung Fu Fighters as either the Mythic Greeks or the Giant Ants, because the Kung Fu Fighters will just steal any kind of power counter that they have. So that includes probably Disco Dancers or anybody else that has power counter mechanics.
Yeah, I was going to have the Giant Ants as the counter that you can counter with the Kung Fu Fighters, because it's transfer +1 powers from any minion, not just your own. So you put a bunch of power counters on your worker, well, I'll just take them from you, and then your worker is useless. He's a 0-powered minion.
So what about counters to Kung Fu Fighters, though?
I think, anything that can deal with a minion in non-conventional ways. So if the Dragon Warrior can't be destroyed, he can be returned, he can be replaced, he could be shuffled. So I think the Vigilantes actually have a card that will shuffle someone into a deck, so that if you build up a lot of counters on the Dragon Warrior, the shuffle, I think knockback into next week is the name of the card, and it will actually shuffle him in, which will avoid the destruction and get him off the table for the time being. Obviously, aliens are great at dealing with people with +1 power counters as well, because you lose those. Which actually leads into my anti-synergy, which is the Time Travelers. because the time travelers are all about actions that are strong and that can be played again. And with the fact that they're so power counter driven, you'd be losing that by, beaming them back up to the hand, or doing a do-over. So I wouldn't pair the time travelers with the Kung Fu fighters.
Yeah, that feels like they would kind of work against each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, despite how timeless the Kung Fu fighters are.
What I was going to say was really interesting, that a faction that's all about balance and yin and yang, it was really hard coming up with anti-synergies for the Kung Fu fighters, and I think that's great. This is something that strikes me as a very good teaching faction. If you're new to the game, this might be one that I would give to you because they're pretty self-explanatory and they do something really cool, and like Eric said, can be a counter to so many factions that I think it's a good starting point.
I think that's really nice to have one of the more advanced, and I mean that as far as timeline goes here, one of the more recent factions to be good for new players, because so much of the game, not so much of the game, but a lot of the game has changed since the very beginning of the game. And some of the factions that are really easy to give to new players from the base set are fun and they're classic, and they're some of my favorite factions in the whole game. But there's been some really cool developments, and to be able to give new players a more recent faction like the Kung Fu fighters, I think is really cool, because they can see some of those developments in play in their very first game right away, and I think that's pretty cool.
Well, that's our preview for the Kung Fu fighters. As always, we don't have time to go into every possible combination. It's only going to get harder as more and more expansions are released. In general, we try to feature the ones that are not as frequently represented as others, like the Minions of Cthulhu, like the vampires. And so we're probably going to miss some combinations that you may have thought of. If there are any that you're particularly passionate about, we'd love to hear about it in the comments. So let us know at crankituppodcast.com. Hey Minions, I'm Jim Price. Welcome to the Breakpoint, the show where we talk all about the Smash Up bases. Today, I'm going to be talking about the base selection logic. This is obviously a rule that has changed over time. When the original Smash Up came out, there were only 8 factions and 16 bases total, so it made sense to use all of them. As the game got bigger, it was harder and harder to use all of the bases, so much so that the current rule as of that 70s expansion says to only use the bases from the sets that are actually in play. So if you're playing with Sharks, use all of It's Your Fault for the bases. If you're playing with the Bear Cavalry, use all of Awesome Level 9000, and do this for every faction in play. But the problem with this approach is that if each player with 4 players is using a different faction from a different set, that's a lot of bases that are going to compose the deck. And the reason why that's problematic is because factions generally get an advantage from the bases that belong to them. If you water down the chances of a faction seeing their own base, it can make it very hard for a player to plan their strategy effectively. Another understated aspect of so many bases is that it's an organizational nightmare. Just take a look at how I've tried to separate the bases by different sets, putting them into individual bags and labeling them. You also need to know what faction corresponds to what base, and a new player may not be able to pick up on that, meaning they have to spend a lot of time organizing these stupid bags. So obviously that approach wasn't very sustainable. What my friends and I have done in the past is we've taken what I call the active bases, the bases belonging to any factions in play, and shuffled those in with the bases from the base game. The problem with this approach is that it makes the base deck be very weighty in compared to everything else, sometimes as much as 2 more times likely to see a card from the base deck than from your own personal factions if no one is using the base deck. So that didn't work out. I know a number of you probably use random bases, but that doesn't work in my opinion either. It's going to create a very large deck, and it also is going to decrease the chance that I mentioned before about seeing your faction's individual base. Maybe there's some room in between. Contrary to what you think, I don't think the base deck needs to be extremely large. The smallest amount of bases you actually need would be 8. How do I know this? Because every Smash Up expansion is actually a 2-player game where each player picks 2 of the factions. Since there are only 8 bases in that set, it obviously worked. And it works really well when you're teaching the game to new players because it lets them see only the bases that will be relevant to the varying factions that are in play. But for flexibility and replayability, you may want to consider increasing this number, which is why I wouldn't recommend 8. I would actually recommend a staggered approach, which increases based on the number of players. Probably something in the range of 16 to 20 to 24 for 2, 3, and 4 players respectively. There's 2 different ways that you could accommodate this. One way would be just to take the given factions and do completely random everything else. But the problem I have with this approach is that it doesn't let you actually take into account the analytical aspect of Smash Up. Smash Up is a deeply strategic game, one where the factions and the bases matter significantly. I don't like the idea of removing that aspect from the game entirely. Maybe there should be a concept of a little bit of a base draft as well. Instead of using pure random bases in order to make up the rest of the deck, what if you allowed a player to use some combination of random that no player knows and drafted bases? If you allow each player to choose 1 or 2 additional bases, you could add another level of strategy to the game. Perhaps the base that works best with a faction isn't the one the faction actually comes with, and that would require you to know a lot about the game and would really reward those people who spend a lot of time with the game. You can still mix in some random bases so that way no one knows what's going to come, and this way everybody has a good chance of getting a base that they chose and a base that they know nothing about. Still, if you maintain that 16, 20, or 24 ratio, you're going to get a good spread between the bases you want and the bases that you don't know that are coming. Another reason why we don't need a very large base deck is because there aren't many cards in the game right now that actually manipulate the base deck at all. The most popular example is going to be terraforming, and if every base is potentially in play, terraforming is going to be way too powerful, and the aliens really don't need any more advantages that they already have. As far as other cards, there aren't that many. The Kaiju and the Explorers are 2 factions that can affect it a lot because the Titan of the Kaiju can actually destroy a base entirely and possibly do that multiple times, and the Explorers get to look and cycle through the base deck. As for other factions, the Dragons have Burn It Down, which will let you replace from the discard pile or the top of the deck, similar to Not in Kansas from the Tornadoes. Time is Fleeting of the Time Travelers will let you pull a base from the discard pile and play it again, so that really doesn't depend on the size of the base deck. And for the Star Roamers, Weird New Worlds will just add 1 base temporarily. So as I said, there aren't many cards that affect the base deck, so you don't need the deck to be really large. As a matter of fact, you could argue that if the deck is never shuffled, the majority of base cards will never even be seen, so why even bother just putting them out? It's more to clean up. Bases are a really important part of Smash Up, probably one of my favorite. I love playing the same faction again with a completely different set of bases because it will create a different experience, which is why I think that you should still be able to maintain the competitive advantage of knowing what you want with the uncertainty of something that's a little bit of a surprise. There's no perfect solution in my opinion, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you think the best way to select your bases are. I'm Jim Price, this is The Breakpoint, let's get rolling.
Hey, I'm Sarah, and I'm here with another entry into the files of Dr. Wen. Today I'm going to be talking about some of the expansions and things that we've seen come out of Smash Up. This is a very expansive game. At this point, we have 10 expansions, including a standalone expansion, the Munchkin expansion. We have a couple of free factions that AEG has given out, including the Geeks faction, which was included with their big geeky box, and the Sheep faction, which they gave out last year as part of a reward for filling out a survey. Those factions will be made available for purchase as single packs in the future, we're told. Hopefully that's true. Now, I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the stuff that has developed as the game has developed in all of this time. So the very first expansion that came out for Smash Up was the Awesome Level 9000 expansion. This one introduced 4 new factions: the Bear Cavalry, Ghosts, Killer Plants, and Steampunks. It also introduced a new keyword, talent. This was an ability that a minion has that they can use once per turn. An example is the Zeppelin, which moves minions around. So the talent keyword hadn't been present in the game until the Awesome Level 9000 expansion, which was the first expansion for the game. Introduced the word talent. After that, we saw the obligatory Cthulhu expansion. That introduced 4 new factions as well: the Minions of Cthulhu, Elder Things, Innsmouth, and Miskatonic University. It also introduced Madness, which came in the form of its own separate deck of Madness cards. All of the Madness cards were identical, and they're referenced in some of the other factions in the obligatory Cthulhu set. You play those Madness cards as part of your actions to get new actions, to destroy minions, that kind of thing, and they shuffle in and out of your deck, your discard pile, your hand, that kind of thing. One of my favorite things about the obligatory Cthulhu set was actually there are some hidden references to Scooby-Doo, and I love Scooby-Doo, so I was very, very excited to see that come into the Smash Up universe. From there, we went on to the science fiction double feature expansion, and this one introduced cyborg apes, shapeshifters, super spies, and time travelers. This one didn't really introduce anything new, but it gave us more factions to play with. After this came the geeks. Now, this was the faction that came with the big geeky box, and it introduced to us some of the big names in the geek world, but brought into the Smash Up game. So we see things like Felicia Day as a minion. I believe Will Wheaton makes an appearance as well. And so they were brought into the game as part of this Geeks faction. After that was Monster Mash. This brought in the giant ants, mad scientists, vampires, and werewolves, and it also introduced a clarification on wording by making 2 a word that we must pay a little bit more attention to than we had previously. It specified that in order to do something to a card in a specific manner with the 2 keyword, the first thing would have to fully resolve in order for the second thing to be able to resolve as well. So if you were unable to, or you got stopped in the middle of resolving that first thing, then you couldn't trigger the second ability if the card had that 2 keyword on there. So some clarification there. Next came the Pretty Pretty expansion, and in this expansion we saw 4 new factions: the fairies, mythic horses, kitty cats, and princesses. In this instance, this was the first time that the phrases crank it up and shut it down, which had initially been about the beginning of a turn and the end of a turn, those have been dropped from the rulebook in the Pretty Pretty expansion, and they weren't seen again in the game. After Pretty Pretty came the Munchkin expansion. This is the only standalone expansion that's come out for the game so far. It is also the only expansion to include 8 factions. That's the most factions that any expansion has had thus far. And it introduced 2 new things to the game: treasures and monsters. Now, these are things we don't see outside of the Munchkin expansion, but they did introduce some new stuff for those types of cards. Next came the It's Your Fault expansion, and this one brought us the dragons, mythic Greeks, sharks, and superheroes. After that came Cease and Desist with the Astro Knights, Charger Bots, Ignobles, and Star Roamers. Then What Were We Thinking with Explorers, Grannies, Rock Stars, and Teddy Bears. This is personally one of my favorites based on the artwork and the synergies between the factions included. I don't personally care to play any of these factions in the game, but I think this is a really, really fun expansion. The fact that you can bring grannies into the game or rock stars, especially since they came in the same expansion, I think is really fun. After that came Big in Japan, and this introduced a pretty big game changer, the Titans. If you're not familiar with the Titans, these are cards that are very powerful and they can be summoned into the game, but they only exist for certain factions. AEG is working to provide some Titans for factions that have already been released, but moving forward they will be providing Titans for some of the factions that we will see in the future as well. These are very powerful cards that come into play. They are not actions, they are not minions, but they can affect the game in some pretty amazing ways. That was a really big part of the Smash Up Big in Japan expansion, but we also saw new factions like the Mega Troopers, the Magical Girls, the Kaiju, and the Itty Creatures factions. Sheep was the next faction to come out, and this one was actually really cool for me because AEG gave it away for free. You just provided some information for them and they shipped it right to your house. If you weren't able to get on that promotion, they are talking about making this faction available for purchase. It's sometime in the future. The Sheep faction was a standalone faction. It was the only one that came in that packaging, but it was fun and silly, and since they gave it away for free, it was a really neat little promotion from the company. And most recently, the That 70s expansion has just been released, and this one introduces a new keyword for standard actions. So these are actions that when played go directly to your discard pile. So there are so many things that have been developed over the course of the game that sometimes the actions that we're playing in the game are not actually an action that could go to our discard pile. So to help us differentiate between those types of actions and other types of actions that we're able to play, they came up with this standard action keyword. That's all of the changes we've seen in the many years that Smash Up has started. I know that there'll be more in the future, and I'm so excited to see where these changes take the game. I like the fact that this company has gradually released these changes, which have kind of beefed up this game. And we didn't have to experience this all at once. We could enjoy the game as fairly a simple card game. We could, understand the rules. It was very easy to pick up on. And they started to just kind of slip these little extras, little step-ups in here and there. And as we have progressed through not only the timeline of the game, but also the complexity of the game, things have changed and grown with us, the players, but still in a way that's accessible to new people. It's not too much to jump in on if you've never played the game before. And I think that's something that's really cool about Smash Up and kind of unique. Games have a tendency to find it difficult to get the timing right on releasing these new types of things about the game. So I think the timing here has been really fun. It's allowed us to grow with the game, and the game has grown with us as well. And I'm excited to see what new keywords will come out with new factions in the future. Thanks for joining me. I'm Sarah, and you've been listening to the Files of Dr. Wen.
Welcome to another episode of Smash Up Mashup. Today we're going to do another outside the box thinking, and we're going to play a game called Guess Who, but with the King of the Hill minions. So the Power 5 and above minions from the different factions. So today I have a very special guest with me. You might know him as the Board Game Bandit.
Hey everyone, Jim Price here.
So we're going to be playing Guess Who. This game was originally created in 1979, so it fits nicely with our That 70s theme that we're continuing with this episode. So we're going to have 24 characters. So Jim's selection will be in red, and my selection will be in blue, just so you can tell who's guessing who. The cards that you see pop up right now are the cards that we've selected to be our minion, our Guess Who character. So we have each selected our minion. So unlike normal Guess Who, where you go, does he have a large nose? Does he have orange hair? We're going to use non-physical descriptive inquiries. So you can't go, do you have large teeth? You can go, do your guy like to eat meat? Is he a vegetarian? Does he like to party? Questions like that. Questions that are atypical of a normal Guess Who game. So we're going to be creative with our questions and figure out who we are.
It's also very possible that our answers can be completely subjective and you could incorrectly rule someone out. That's part of the game.
Absolutely, which makes it all the more fun. So Jim, being the guest, why don't you go first?
Okay. Question number 1. Would the average male adult be embarrassed to hang out with you?
Average male adult be embarrassed to hang out with me? I'm going to say no. The average male adult would not be embarrassed to hang out with me.
Okay. Goodbye, Mega Trooper. Goodbye, Lunar Captain. Goodbye, Critter Champion. Titania, you're questionable. Eliza, goodbye. Queen Fluffy, you're questionable. Starlight of the Mythic Horses, you're gone. Little Bo Peep, you're a little questionable. All right, your turn.
All right. Are you a leader?
Yes.
You are a leader. So, ship captain's in, leader's in. Little Bo Peep, you're in. Dragon Warrior. Maybe. Space Knight? Not really. So you just say we're a leader. So Ezra is in, Queen Fluffy's in, Starlight? I'm going to say no. Great Worm?
No, in order to be a leader, you must have followers, and dragons rule alone. Awesome guy. Him is questionable. I don't think he's a leader. Fey Fighter is definitely not a leader. Dwarf King, yes. Tina, yes, is a leader. Big Hero, maybe. Blaster Master, yes. Cardinal, yes. Red Trooper, yes. Luna Captain, yes. Critic Champion. Top of the leaderboard, maybe. So I'll let that one go. Odysseus, maybe. El Bendito. I'll put you as maybe for now. Kings are in, and Dregs, yes. All right.
Do you like to travel?
Do I like to travel? Do I like to travel? I would say yes.
Goodbye, Great Worm. Ship's Captain, definitely. Leader 2, he loves to travel. Little Bo Peep, yes. Dragon Warrior, you're questionable. Queen Fluffy, no. She does not like to travel. She likes to stay in one place. The Cardinal, you're questionable. Blaster Master, Big Hero, Titania. The Dwarf King does not like to travel. He loves sitting on his throne. The Critter Champion, we ruled her out already. Odysseus, he's forced to travel. El Bandito loves to travel. King Rex, you're questionable. And Dancing King, you're questionable too.
Okay. Do you believe in the feudal system?
No.
No. That actually helps a lot because that eliminates Space Knights, Ezra, Queen Fluffy.
So you're asking if the thing from the far away that exists in the future, you're making a statement about the feudal system on that.
Time far, far away?
A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
Yeah.
Yeah. I bet they don't even know what the feudal system was.
Well, the feudal system was in the past, and it was a long, long time ago, so it was in the past.
But probably not as earlier as Star Wars.
All right. Dwarf Knight, Dwarf King, Dwarf Knight, Free Fighter. Tina's the Queen of Fairies, I believe. Big Hero is already eliminated. Well, he's questionable, so he's out now. Blaster Master, maybe. Cardinal, maybe. Dancing King, yes. King Rex, yes. Auntie, yes. All right, your turn.
Do you like science fiction?
Do I like science fiction? No, I do not like science fiction.
Okay. Goodbye, Ship's Captain. Leader 2. Goodbye, Space Knight. Blaster Master, you're questionable. Awesome Guy. I feel like superheroes are science fiction. So I'm going to put Awesome Guy as questionable, but he shouldn't like science fiction. King Rex looks like he has a little bit of a jetpack. And yeah, I'm going to say King Rex does not like science fiction because it killed him. And Answer Drake's, you're questionable as well. Alright, your turn.
Do you believe in magic?
Yes.
You do believe in magic. So, Ship Captain's out. Leader 2 out. Little Peep, maybe. Dragon Warrior, absolutely not. Cardinal, even magic, no. Blaster Master, no. Wait. You said they do believe in magic, right?
I do believe in magic.
You do believe in magic, so Cardinal's still out, but Blaster Master is in. Alright, those are out.
Do you like to play Munchkin?
Do I like to play Munchkin? I feel like that's kind of a physical descriptive question.
It is not a physical descriptive question.
Because there's Munchkin minions on here. And therefore, you're asking basically what faction.
You could have made the same argument about science fiction double feature, which is also a Smash Up expansion. Admittedly not represented on here.
You know what? I do believe in Munchkins.
I don't trust your answer. That's not what I asked. Do you like to play Munchkin?
Do I like to play Munchkin? I'm trying to think of how Munchkins are played. Yes, I like to play Munchkins. My answer stays.
Dancing King does not like to play Munchkin. El Bandito does not like to play Munchkin. Odysseus does not like to play Munchkin. Ant of Drakes might actually like to play it. Fae Fighter, definitely. Big Hero, Blaster Master, and Cardinal, they all like to play Munchkin. Dragon Warrior does not. He's all about honor, and Munchkin has no honor. And Little Bo Peep, you're still questionable, Little Bo Peep.
Do you run towards danger?
Yes, I do.
You do run towards danger.
Remember, it's possible we have the same one.
Oh, I know.
I'm letting the audience know.
Okay. You would run towards danger. That really doesn't eliminate much because that's still... You know what? I'm going to take a gamble and I'm going to eliminate Little Bo Peep. She wants to lead her people away from danger.
Do you hang out with animals?
Do I hang out with animals? No. I do not hang out with animals.
Goodbye, Ant of Drakes. Goodbye, Little Bo Peep. That should eliminate the top row. Cardinal, Blaster Master, Big Hero. I don't believe Titania would hang out with animals in the forest, so she's gone. Fae Fighter is still in. Awesome Guy is still in. King Rex is definitely out. Yeah, so bottom row is gone. Pretty sure you're in the middle row. I've got him.
Are you the Critter Champion?
Yes.
Got him. Who do you think I was?
Are you in the middle row?
Who do you think I was?
I think you are probably Awesome Guy.
I am not Awesome Guy.
Who are you?
I am Cardinal. Still available, right?
Still available, yeah. My next question was going to be, are you good at sword fighting?
That would be good. That would
have narrowed it down.
That would eliminate Awesome Guy
or Blaster Master. Because Awesome Guy actually is good at sword fighting.
Is he?
Yeah, he's awesome.
So that means he's just good at everything.
Right.
Okay.
Which includes sword fighting. That would have narrowed it down to Cardinal or Blaster Master. How many did you have left over?
I had Career Champion, Lunar Captain, and Red Trooper. And that's it. Like, I eliminated, and I didn't really figure out how am I going to differentiate between those three. And I think the way you answered one of the questions was like, yeah, she would run towards danger. Like, obviously the Red Trooper and Lunar Captain were both immediately yeses. Where Career Champion, all right, she looks out just so that she can find danger, so she can get the new creatures.
No, the red Trooper would actually teleport towards danger, not actually run towards it.
So if it was Red Trooper, you would have said no?
Well, no, I had to think about it.
Okay. You're trying to validate why you were thinking about it.
Also, the Critter Champion doesn't actually go towards the danger. They send the Pokemon towards the danger, so there's a lot to deliberate on.
True.
All right, nicely done.
Nicely done, indeed. Whew, I can't believe I slipped ahead just there at the end there. I had to take a gamble, and I was right. All right, so thank you for joining us for another episode of Smash Up Mashup. I hope you enjoyed that as much as we did, and I hope you think of something new to do with your Smash Up box. So, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns,
Just remember that we get all royalties from Smash Up Mashup.
yeah, when's that check going to come in? That'd be great. But yes, thank you for joining us. And if you have any ideas for some outside the box thinking, please be sure to leave a comment below. Thank you.
Well, that's our show. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next in May, but we'll continue to have smaller updates throughout the week. Be sure to look out for King of the Hill updates on Mondays, action awareness updates on Fridays, as well as some special content from time to time.
You can catch all that on our Facebook and YouTube pages. Be sure to like and subscribe.
Well, that 70s is out. Be sure to check out your local game store.
All right, let's shut it down.